If you feel like money is getting harder to breathe with, if each month goes by faster but your balance doesn't, if you have a job and income, maybe you're even earning more than you did a few years ago, yet you still live with a constant sense of financial unease, it may not be because you're bad with money. 10 or 15 years ago, the picture looked very different. Someone with a stable job, a manageable loan, a home that wasn't too far from where life happened, and a little money left at the end of the month. Not rich, but secure. Today, nominal income is higher. Opportunities are everywhere. Financial tools are more accessible than ever. And yet the feeling is the opposite. Always running, always cautious, always aware that one small disruption could knock everything off balance. This is the paradox so many people are living inside right now, doing more things right and yet feeling more fragile than ever. And the most dangerous part isn't overspending. It isn't a lack of effort. It's that you're quietly blaming yourself for a problem that isn't purely personal. Think about it this way. A bridge doesn't collapse because of one heavy truck. It collapses because of many small forces applied repeatedly over a long enough period of time until the structure underneath can't hold anymore. Personal finance works the same way. It rarely falls apart because of one stupid decision. It breaks down because of many small pressures, each one reasonable on its own, but together they begin to crack the system. This video isn't here to tell you what to invest in. It won't tell you how to budget, and it won't promise to make you rich faster. It does one thing only: it explains why personal finance is becoming more fragile even when you didn't do anything wrong. And once you understand that, you stop blaming yourself and you start seeing the system with clear eyes. One reason this feels so confusing is because most people were taught personal finance the wrong way. They were taught to see it as a list of skills: earn more, spend less, save the difference, invest wisely. And if something goes wrong, the assumption is simple: you didn't execute one of those steps well enough. But that framework no longer matches reality. Personal finance today is not a checklist. It's a system. A system shaped by interest rates, by labor markets, by housing costs, by inflation, by access to credit, and by psychological pressure that never fully turns off. You can manage your money perfectly inside your own spreadsheet and still feel financially unstable if the system around you is constantly shifting. Here's the key shift most people miss. When systems change, individual optimization stops working the way it used to. Think about flying a plane. If the weather is calm, small adjustments keep you on course. But when turbulence increases, the same inputs produce very different outcomes. That's what's happening to personal finance right now. The rules didn't disappear. They just became less forgiving. Small mistakes carry bigger consequences. Small pressures compound faster. And stability requires more margin than it used to. That's why so many people feel like they're doing everything right and still falling behind. They're not failing at money. They're operating inside a system that now punishes fragility much more aggressively than before. When people hear the word inflation, they think about prices going up. But that's not the real danger. The real danger is purchasing power quietly leaking away while your life looks mostly the same. Here's how it works in practice. Let's say your income goes up 5% this year. On paper, that looks like progress. But your rent rises 8%. Groceries are up 10. Insurance premiums jump 12. Healthcare costs creep higher without warning. Nothing explodes. There's no dramatic collapse. But at the end of the month, there's less room to breathe. That's inflation doing its real job. It doesn't scare you. It compresses you. A decade ago, many households could survive comfortably spending around 30% of their income on housing. Today, in many cities, that number sits closer to 40 or even 50%. That one shift alone changes everything. Less room for savings, less tolerance for mistakes, less ability to absorb surprises. And the most deceptive part, you don't feel poorer all at once. You just feel permanently tight. You start making defensive choices. You delay long-term plans. You focus on getting through the next few months instead of thinking 5 or 10 years ahead. Inflation doesn't break your finances in a single moment. It reshapes your behavior. And once your behavior shifts towards survival mode, your financial system becomes far more fragile even if your income keeps rising. That's why inflation is so dangerous. Not because prices go up, but because time horizons shrink. And when people stop thinking long-term, systems stop compounding in their favor. Interest rates are often described as a technical detail, a number set by central banks, something abstract. But in real life, interest rates are much simpler than that. Interest is the price of time. And when that price rises, every decision that involves borrowing doesn't just cost more money, it costs future flexibility. When rates are low, debt feels manageable. Payments are smaller. Mistakes are easier to absorb. Time feels abundant. But when rates stay high, the math changes. Every installment plan becomes a long-term commitment. Every loan turns into a promise you have to keep regardless of what happens next. And the more of those promises you stack up, the less room you have to breathe. Here's where the illusion breaks. Compare two people. Person A earns a high income. On paper, they look successful, but they carry a large mortgage, a car loan, and revolving credit. Person B earns less. Nothing flashy, but their fixed obligations are minimal. When something unexpected happens, a slowdown, a job change, a medical issue, person A feels it first, not because they earn less, but because their cash flow is already spoken for. Debt doesn't just reduce money, it locks the future. That's why high earners with heavy debt often feel more fragile than people with modest incomes and low obligations. The weakness isn't low income. The weakness is being trapped inside fixed payments when conditions shift. High interest rates don't create bad decisions. They expose how little margin there really was. And once margin disappears, pressure multiplies quickly. When income becomes uncertain, something subtle but powerful happens. People stop thinking long-term. It's not a conscious choice, it's a survival response. When you're not sure how stable next month looks, your brain shifts priorities. You don't ask, what's the smartest move over the next 5 years? You ask, how do I make sure nothing goes wrong right now? That shift changes everything. People avoid investing not because they don't understand it, but because waiting feels dangerous. They avoid slowing down even when slowing down would lead to better decisions. They choose what feels safe in the short-term, stable routines, familiar paths, predictable outcomes, even if those choices quietly increase long-term risk. Here's the paradox. Short-term safety often comes at the cost of long-term resilience. Someone who fears losing their job might cling to certainty, delay skill development, avoid strategic risks, and over-prioritize immediate income in the moment that feels responsible. But over time, it narrows options. Income instability doesn't take money away from you immediately. It takes something far more important. It takes your ability to think patiently. And when patience disappears, compounding disappears with it. That's why uncertainty is so corrosive to personal finance. Not because it reduces earnings today, but because it forces people into defensive thinking that slowly makes their entire financial system more fragile. One of the most underestimated forces in personal finance is the weight of fixed costs. Housing, utilities, transportation, insurance, subscriptions that quietly became non-negotiable. Individually, none of these look dangerous. Together, they form something far more powerful, a locked trajectory. The higher your fixed costs, the less room you have to adapt. That's the part most people miss. Flexibility isn't about how much you earn. It's about how much of your income is already spoken for before life even begins. Compare two people again. Person A earns a high income, but half or more of it disappears automatically each month into housing payments and obligations they can't easily change. Person B earns less, but their fixed costs are low. They can cut, pause, adjust, or relocate if needed. When pressure hits a market downturn, a job disruption, a personal emergency, Person B bends, Person A cracks, not because Person A lacks money, but because they lack room to move. High fixed costs turn small problems into big ones. They shorten decision windows. They force rush choices. They convert uncertainty into panic. That's why so many high earners feel financially trapped. Personal finance doesn't fail because income is too low. It fails because commitments are too rigid. Money doesn't disappear all at once. Options do. And once options are gone, even strong incomes become fragile. Markets have always been volatile. That part isn't new. Prices move, cycles turn, fear and optimism alternate. What has changed is how personal financial systems interact with that volatility. When pressure is low, volatility feels manageable. You can wait, you can observe, you can stay patient. But when margin is thin, volatility becomes psychological. Every dip feels personal. Every headline feels urgent. Every move feels like it demands a response. That's when behavior takes over. Volatility triggers FOMO. It triggers panic. It triggers emotional decisions that feel logical in the moment. People chase what already ran. They sell what temporarily fell. They react instead of positioning. Here's the critical distinction. Markets don't destroy wealth by moving. They destroy wealth by provoking bad reactions. Two people can experience the same market environment. One remains calm, the other spirals. The difference isn't intelligence, it's pressure. When your financial system is tight, your tolerance for uncertainty collapses. And once uncertainty feels unbearable, decision quality drops sharply. Markets didn't make you poorer. They revealed how little margin you had to withstand emotional stress. That's why volatility feels more dangerous today than it used to. Not because markets are worse, but because people are operating closer to their breaking point. Most personal financial systems don't collapse on their own. They collapse when life intervenes. A health issue, an accident, a family emergency, something unplanned, something unavoidable. What's important to understand is this: these events are not rare. They're normal, and yet most financial systems are built as if they'll never happen. Budgets assume steady income. Debt assumes uninterrupted cash flow. Plans assume continuity. Very few systems are designed around disruption. So when a shock hits, it feels catastrophic. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The shock didn't cause the collapse. It exposed it. If one medical bill, one accident, or one family obligation is enough to unravel everything, the fragility was already there. The event was just the last push. This is why people are often confused by financial breakdowns. They look back and ask, how did this happen so fast? It didn't. The system had been under strain for years. Thin margins, high fixed costs, locked commitments, constant pressure. The shock simply removed the illusion of stability. Unexpected events don't destroy strong systems. They stress test them. And weak systems fail quietly all at once. When you step back and look at the full picture, one thing becomes clear. There isn't a single cause. Personal finance doesn't break because of inflation alone, or interest rates, or debt, or income instability, or housing costs, or psychology, or unexpected events. It breaks because all of them pull in the same direction. Each pressure on its own looks manageable. Each one feels rational. Each decision makes sense in isolation. But together they compress margin, shorten time horizons, and turn flexibility into fragility. That's why personal finance rarely collapses with drama. It erodes, and by the time the damage is visible, the system underneath has already changed shape. So here's the line that matters. Personal finance doesn't collapse because of one bad decision. It collapses because many small pressures quietly push you in the same direction without you ever noticing. Which leads to the only question worth asking. Not how do I get rich quickly, but how do I build a system that doesn't break when conditions change? That question doesn't promise excitement, It doesn't sell fantasies, but it's the question that separates looking financially stable from actually being resilient. And in the world we're living in now, resilience is the real advantage.